Congratulations. Unstill Life has been getting some amazing press. It's been picked for a bunch of summer must-read lists. Did you expect that kind of reception?
Somebody told me yesterday, it was a great quote, they said, everybody thinks book publishing is a business, but it's a casino. And I just, I wanted it to get out there, and I was thrilled to get, a great agent and a good publishing house. And of course I want more.
I finished reading the book last week and absolutely loved it. I thought it was very sensitively handled and absolutely fascinating. So I'd love to start with talking a little bit about the boys. Do you have any really distinct memories of them, or is that mostly from your parents' documentation?
I have very distinct memories of Mark Rothko because I played with his son a lot, and because he spent the summer in Berkeley when I was there. Also, my mom was their third wheel, when he was married to Mel. So I saw him and his wife and their family without my father there. So they were much more part of our social scene. He's probably the one I have the most distinct memories. And then later on, people like Krista when I was older. But when I was really little, it was probably mostly Mark Rothko. And then just kind of the whole swirl of the group, because there was an art critic named Dory Ashton, who comes up a little bit at the end of the book. She was the art critic at the Times. And she was very close to Mark Rothko, too, and to Motherwell and these people. Actually, she was on the board for the Motherwell Foundation for a long time. So I played with her children, and our parents socialized, and we would go to their house, and we would see the same crowd of people. Because it was such a small scene in those days that everybody kind of saw everybody a few times a week.
How did knowing these people or having that kind of intimacy with them change your understanding of their careers once you got older?
I didn't really know who they were when I was little. They were just people my parents hung out with, and it was only later on. I think the first time I really kind of understood it was, I don't even write about this, but I was in grammar school, and they put a poster of a painting up on the wall, and it was Mona Lisa, by Da Vinci, and everybody in my class knew that it was a Da Vinci, but I only knew, what a Jackson Pollock or a Mark Rothko looked like. So that was when I sort of began to understand that I had a different point of view. And then after my dad left, that sort of very rarefied world, it became apparent to me how rarefied that world was, because it disappeared, or it became, my mom still continued to go out for a number of years and be part of it, but it began to shrink. Later on, of course, with Mark's suicide and the incredible drama and uproar and turmoil that happened in the art world because of that. When I moved to Deerfield and I realized that people knew about who these people were, taking an art class, and I would mention a name and people knew who I was talking about, then I began to understand that it was sort of larger than my own experience. But, it's a funny thing, because in the 60s, especially in the late 60s, the abstract expressionists and those people were being pushed out by all the pop art artists. They kind of disappeared from the scene to a certain extent, and they moved off, and they went to different places, and some of them died. So it was only later on it became such a famous movement. Then it came back around again, and people realized how important they were. And people didn't look at Clifford Still for many, many years.
Do you have any really distinct memories of living in Deerfield?
Yeah, it was really different, especially from Greenwich Village. First of all, the high school had an amazing art department, I have to say, Deerfield High, and we had some great teachers. That was the end of the 70s when everybody was doing open classrooms and experimenting with different kinds of learning environments. They had a week where we would get to take over the school and just do art everywhere. I don't know if they would do that anymore. That was a really distinct memory. They had arts in Riverwood. People would lend their homes and have very regional art shown in this kind of festival. And that felt very different than the art scene in New York, because it felt somewhat exclusive. And of course, we used to go to the Art Institute when it was just that one building. I loved that. Because I had this relationship to the Art Institute that I had to the Metropolitan when I was a little girl. It was the place I would run away to. I knew the back of my hand. It became very familiar. I knew where the paintings were because they didn't move, and you always saw them.
Yeah, I remember you writing in the book that when your mother found out you had been ditching school to go to the Art Institute, she just took you there.
She took me there, and I was so heartbroken looking at this painting because my dad had just sold his Roscoe, and he had also testified on the wrong side, or what I consider the wrong side, of this famous trial that was going on in New York at that time. And that was also when it became international news because of the trial. And so I wrote a poem about it in the Art and Literary magazine of my high school. So that was kind of like the moment I felt like I was connecting to both worlds.
I know there were some things going on in the Chicago art scene at the time. Did you have any interest in the Chicago Imagists or Gladys Nielsen?
My mom was born in Chicago, and so my parents lived there after they were married, and my dad was really involved with, I guess they were called the Monster Roaster group, Leon Golub, Nancy Spiro, who were Imagists, and H.C. Westerman, I think, who influenced the Harry who I think you're talking about. My dad took me to see them, and I was interested. And later on, when I was in California in college, I became aware of these really strong female artists that came out of Chicago. Like Joan Mitchell came out of Chicago, and Nancy Spiro actually came out of Chicago, and so did Judy Chicago. Very strong female artist. Nancy Spiro ended up in New York, and she's like, the mother of feminist art. So, yeah, I became aware of it towards the end of high school.
And when you went away to college, did you always have the intention to study art? Was that something?
No. I mean, I liked doing art in high school the way, a lot of us did. It was a creative outlet. I think my interest in studying art is very much tied to my desire to connect with my father. It was the language that we conversed in, and it was how we connected as a family. We didn't go to ball games. We went to galleries. I think that's why I took it up. And then after there was a period when I was quite angry and upset with him, I sort of pulled away from it. So I had to come back to it on my own terms.
I know that you write about art now. How did you develop your own voice?
There was a long time when a lot of art writing was very academic and sort of had that, I call it art speak, didn't allow the reader access into the material. And I've always approached writing about art like I write about anything else. I want it to be very accessible. So I approached it like a writer, and I learned to write really from my mom. She was a writer. So I always wanted anything I write about art to actually sort of incorporate a story, not just what it's about and what it looks like, but the history, and has an arc. At the time I was writing the book, I was reading a cookbook memoir, and I was thinking, wow, wouldn't it be wonderful if it could be as delicious as that you could have this visceral experience reading about a piece of artwork. So that's kind of what I wanted to do. I wanted it to be really tangible and delicious.
So as you've studied art history, has that helped you to understand certain events that were going on in your childhood?
It helped me understand what was happening with my parents and what was happening with the people around me. It helped me put it into a context. I don't think it really changed anything, though. When you're a kid growing up, you feel things. An intellectual understanding, it doesn't change the way it felt. There's still like a wound there. There was a lot of stuff we were exposed to as children in the name of art that wasn't art. That was just chaos. That was just people acting out. So I think it is true that art can be anything, but I don't think it's true that art is everything.
Well, I hope it continues to do really well.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked it.
Oh, yeah. It reminded me a lot of The Glass Castle, which is another memoir, in that it was such an honest but unmelodramatic way of addressing these events.
Yeah, I know. First of all, I didn't want to hurt anybody. Second of all, I think reading my mom's journals and the letters, I really saw her side and my dad's side, and it made me understand it in a whole way instead of just bits and pieces. I guess it also felt like I was mending a hole in my life by writing that book. Sewing the pieces together that felt ripped apart and bringing, like, my mom and my dad back to one place in one story. Like I was bringing everybody back together, and that felt good. And even the title, Unstill Life, my dad was the unstill one, my mother was the still one. So they're both encapsulated in that word.